Millennial Pagan Podcast. I'm Autumn Wolf.
And I'm Jera Stone. And actually, we got something pretty special going on right now. We're actually doing a Zoom live streaming with our guests. We have Rois.
Hi.
And Phoenix.
Hey.
Hey, so glad you guys, this is the first time that we're doing this whole thing. You guys are our first guests actually doing a Zoom chat thingy with. So thank you for at least being our guinea pigs.
Well, thank you for having us.
Everything's going to change as far as your 2-year anniversary, apparently. Now you don't even need to be in the same place anymore.
I know.
This is pretty awesome. So if you're listeners, on any of your normal thing and you're wondering, hey, Zoom means that there could be a visual, hop on over to YouTube because you could see our shining faces.
Well, I don't know. I put some matte primer on today, so it's not so shiny.
I didn't know you had a boyfriend named Matt.
I have 3.
Oh.
That's gotta get confusing.
A little bit. It can be.
I dated a guy with my normal name once. Like, we had the same name, and it was...
Oh, wow.
So we asked our dear friends, Phoenix and Rois, to come on and talk a little bit. They actually suggested the topic. And the topic that they suggested was...
couples magic.
Yeah, and also how to kind of blend traditions together when maybe certain people in your family aren't the same tradition, but you still want to work magic together. So I'm pretty excited about this. I think it's going to be a fun episode. So before we go into that, as all of our listeners know, we must do coming of witch stories.
So, Rois, why don't you go ahead and go first and tell us your coming out story?
Okay, I will try to keep this from being too long. I don't know. I guess I was really attracted to the idea of magic as a kid, and it just never changed. So, I think I did my first spell when I was 8, even though I didn't necessarily think of it that way. And I started studying magic in middle school, but I didn't really start practicing until I was 19. I got to meet a few different witches, and I ended up living with one when I was 19, and that really changed my worldview. And I got to, I'd started reading oracle decks when I was around 11, but I started reading tarot, and I worked as a tarot reader. So I just got deeper and deeper into things, and I was looking for a group because I had friends who were amazing, and I would get all excited about what I was discovering and learning, and my friends were so indulgent and nice, and I'm like, I need to find people who actually care about this stuff to get excited, because my friends have been so cool, and I need to reward that behavior. So back when the witch's voice was actually a thing, I went and Witch Vox. It was awesome. I'm old. And I met actually my best friend on the internet, and she posted this ad for what she wanted her coven to be. And we were all baby witches. None of us had very much experience at all. And we formed our own group and learned from each other and made mistakes with each other, but it was just an incredibly positive experience. So since the coven that we formed together, I've got to work with a couple other covens that were also really positive, really good experiences. And I don't know, I love magic. I love connecting to nature. I love learning, and being pagan has just fulfilled all those desires. So I don't know. It's a really important aspect of my life.
Nice.
That's awesome. I'm glad you had such a positive experience.
Yeah, I keep meeting people, and they keep telling me their experiences. And I'm like, I am so sorry. I was practicing with a bunch of other people who also knew very little, but because of that, it wasn't necessarily a control situation or a potentially abusive situation. And so even though we were ignorant, we sort of protected each other in our ignorance, and it was really cool.
Awesome.
So what would you say is the path that you practice?
Oh, that's a good question. I am very open. Sometimes I question what the divine is and what the nature of it is. And so there's times where I've been almost agnostic, And actually, I'm really connected to Bast. She's one of the first goddesses I ever worked with. And that was actually the first ritual, like spiritual ritual I ever performed. It was my dog had cancer.
Aww.
And I was so worried about, I kept thinking like, well, if magic is real and I do something and it's wrong, I was really afraid. I just wasn't willing to take that risk of like making a mistake and messing something up. But like, I refer to this dog as my soulmate. Like that's how close we were. We were just perfect for each other. And seeing him suffering, I just couldn't handle it. So I'm like, all right, I got to do something. And I went to the magic shop where afterwards I ended up tarot reading there. And I spoke to a priestess and I told her the situation. And she's like, okay, this is animal healing. And, you're going to talk to Bast and you're going to use this candle and use this incense. And this is the ritual you need to perform. And so I did it and it was very intense. I was a virgin at the time, and I would never recommend to somebody who is a virgin necessarily connecting with Bast because it can be a little intense. But yeah, that was my first experience with her, and because it did not cure my dog's cancer. But what I had asked for was that, if you cannot heal him, will you please remove his pain and his suffering? Because I just didn't want him to suffer. And I performed this ritual. I laid hands on him, and his pain eased. He was certainly in a lot less pain after that. So
Awesome.
Unfortunately, we put him down because the cancer was all through his body. But yeah, it was a really meaningful experience, and that was just sort of my beginning. It's like, okay, what am I willing to take a risk for? Like, I will take a risk for love. Like that. Apparently, that's my line. So that was my beginning, and I didn't really realize the nature of having relationships with the goddess at that time. So I was like, oh, well, Bast helped me with that. And I just didn't really think about it afterwards. And it really wasn't until recently where I was in a situation again where there was an animal I was worried about. And I was like, okay, I can talk to Bast about this, but now I know how I'm supposed to behave. And I can't just like, will you please help me? And then I'm going to ignore you for 20 years. So I was like, all right. So if you're going to help me again, I promise to be properly behaved this time, and we will have a relationship and it will continue. And so that's where I am now.
I've heard that kind of story before.
I have that story. Yes. So you use the word virgin. Do you mean virgin as magical virgin?
I mean, in every sense. 100% virgin.
Some of our listeners need to know the difference.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a strong proponent of, the virgin. My understanding is that the original meaning of that word in Greek was an unmarried woman who was powerful, which I think is a fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Like most of us should be virgins.
Right? Yes, exactly.
So, I think that word, we can use it how we want to use it, and it can mean what we want to mean. But the idea of a woman who is powerful and not an instrument of control by anyone else is like really exciting and cool. So
yes. Well, thank you for sharing that and that touching story. Phoenix, are you ready to share your coming of witch story?
Yeah, mine's a little bit more complicated, but I'm willing to give it a go.
Complicated?
I'm ready for a story.
Yeah. When I was 12, I was sent to my grandparents in California to help clean their hoarder house. And my grandmother gave me a set of tarot cards that came from her grandmother.
Ooh.
And so I got a little bit into that. Ironically, at the same exact time, she also bought me the 3 core rule books for Dungeons and Dragons. So I was into magic all of a sudden, and I had a hand-down set of tarot cards that I was starting to work with. I got really interested, researched things. I did the Silver Raven Wolf, or whatever her name is. Got me interested in Wicca, because that's where a lot of people start. And I tried to become part of 2 separate covens by the time I was 15. And both times I was rejected because I was a male.
Oh.
Yeah. So my hard stop at 16 was a couple of guys in button-down shirts and black ties showed up at my house, and I became a Mormon for a year.
Oh.
And then after that, I became agnostic, but I still was using the tarot cards, and I was still very interested. I was reading different books on magic theory and whatnot. And then I started listening to podcasts, and there was one called Last Podcast on the Left. And they had a series on esoteric paths. One was left hand, right hand, and chaos. And chaos magic spoke to me pretty hard. And since then, I've been practicing solo until about, 3 months ago, when after Rois and I got engaged, we finally started doing some rituals together. And so it's stepping out of my comfort zone, because as a chaot, I am very solo practicing, don't really talk about it to a lot of people. So
That's one tradition we haven't had somebody on yet about, was a lot of the chaos traditions or chaos magic. And so that's a lot of blending that had to happen, I'm sure. So that's a good place for two very different paths.
yeah, it's still a work in progress, but we feel like we're doing it pretty well.
Won't
good.
it always be? Awesome. So thank you for sharing your story. So do we want to go ahead and just dive on into talking about maybe blending some of those traditions together to work together, or maybe talk about your first experience in ritual together?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm down with either of those. For our first experience in ritual together definitely is a story.
Ooh, I like stories.
All right. Well, who wants to go first?
You said you were going to go first, so you get to go first.
Okay.
She
All right.
did start off the whole coming of weight.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that seems fair. All right. So it was actually a really simple working. The people that we live with, a couple of friends in Chandler, and nobody was really sleeping well. And so Rois was wanted to do a thing that would just kind of help everybody sleep. And I don't know how familiar you are with chaos magic, but I was a little insecure. She's got way more experience than me as far as like ritual and whatnot. So I kind of just naturally took the lead because it was the only thing I knew how to do. So I made a sigil. Do you guys know what those are?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Made a sigil. She gathered. What did you get, Royce?
I didn't want to interfere with what Phoenix was doing. I wanted to have like complementary support. So since what he was doing was very physical, I just tried to basically utilize sympathetic magic to support what he was doing. So I got some incense, and I think I got frankincense and myrrh to honor my goddess Bas, to like support what we were doing. And then I brought a candle, and I think I anointed it in lavender oil to promote like peace and rest and healing sleep. So just some really gentle touches to back up what Phoenix was doing in his part of the ritual.
In the process, I closed my sigil in a circle. And at that moment, this is only part of the story, my engagement ring broke while I was focusing on the love I needed to close it, because we're doing a working based on trying to take care of everyone in the family. Mm-hmm. So that's important for later.
Maybe you should note that like part of the idea when we were talking about engagement rings for Phoenix is I asked him what kind of jewelry he likes. Like, I will get you whatever you want. And he said he really liked hematite rings, which of course, are not so expensive, but also prone to breaking. So I was like, I had this very romantic idea of just buying them in bulk. And what I didn't consider is that Phoenix is a man-sized person, whereas I'm used to like, it's easy for me to find like, hematite rings that fit my fingers. But since his fingers are larger, like it's way harder to find something that actually fits his ring finger. Yeah, this was not as easy as I thought it would be.
Yeah, I've got ham hocks. I know exactly what that's talking.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I love his hands. They're beautiful. Yeah. They're just, they're larger than mine. So I was like, oh, this will be easy. And I'm like, oh, this is not easy.
It's very difficult to find, especially hematite rings that'll fit.
Right.
So I have the opposite problem at like black market minerals. I can't find a hematite ring that fits me because I guess I have like pianist fingers that I never utilize.
You're built like a fairy. It's fine.
I'm a chubby fairy. I'll take
it. Look at you bounce. Yeah, and at the time she had gotten me a jade ring.
Oh,
right. Yeah.
And so that was the one that broke the same exact second that I closed the circle.
Wow.
So going from there, I'm excitatory, so I do flow arts when I try to fire my sigils. So I put together my staff with the LED lights in it, and I turned on a song that was appropriate for what we were trying to do, and I started spinning until I hit flow state, and that sigil was no longer able to stay in my head. As far as what Royce was focusing on, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I was watching, because if we are going to continue to do ritual together, I was really trying to like watch with my eyes and watch with my senses to feel his energy flow and how he works and where he's at, because I want our work to be complementary. But in order for that to be ideal, I need to see him in action. So it was mostly me like paying attention and holding the goal in my mind while we're doing all of this to sort of like support what we were doing.
Kind of like a sacred witnessing.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really smart way to put it.
One of the things I did notice, like as I was spinning, was I really started to get this, like, have you ever walked into a fog bank or walked out of a fog bank?
Yes.
It was like that change in moisture almost, but obviously we're in Phoenix. There is no moisture. So it was like being surrounded by her. Like it felt comfortable, and it felt like my movements were supported and a little bit more confident than they would normally be. Like there was less worry of messing up the flow, and it was just kind of natural.
I like that. They're like just kind of like a magical embrace of the space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a great way to put that. Absolutely. Like it was almost like we were moving together. I don't know. That's how I experienced it anyway.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. Like our first ritual together. It's funny because we've actually, at this point, I think we've known each other for a year as far as like when we first met. And we talked about doing ritual together several times, but I didn't want to force it. I didn't want to say like, oh, well, we're going to do ritual together now. I wanted it to be really natural and a time where we both felt really comfortable about it. And I know since Phoenix's practice is different from mine, he was maybe a little hesitant or felt like, oh, well, I don't really know what to do. And I didn't want him to feel that way. I'm like, oh no, you know everything you need to know. I've worked with people who are, quote unquote experienced, who are, they just didn't really impress me much. And Phoenix may be new to some of this stuff, but he's so intuitive and his own abilities are so powerful and impressive. I'm like, you don't have to worry about what other people know. Like, you know enough in yourself. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. So that's why I really wanted him to lead our first couple of rituals, so he could have that confidence and just know that like he doesn't need other people's knowledge. His knowledge is enough.
Kind of got chills with that because that's 100% right.
Yeah.
You can have the most educated, experienced, magical practitioner, and you're standing there and it's like, I feel nothing. You don't know. Are you raising? Are you what's going on? There's no flow. And then you have somebody who's like just walked into the practice, who can be incredibly intuitive. They know in themselves, and they've done their own energy work and own like shadow work. And it might not have been in a magical container that they did this, but once they walk into the magical container, it's like, oh, I know how to fill this, and I know how to work in this. The structure makes sense to me already. And then you're just like, that's I think very much the difference between somebody who's naturally in tune with themselves and somebody who isn't. And a lot of that does come from knowing yourself. So that's awesome.
Yeah. If anybody has done shadow work, 100%, it's Phoenix. Like,
Okay. I'm not entirely sure what you guys mean by that.
Okay, so I don't want to tell your stories. You can tell your own stories, but when you talk to me about your experience at your first music festival and your commitment to the person that you want to be, you've worked really hard. Okay. And that's shadow work, right? Like going to the places that make us uncomfortable, going to the places that scare us, going to the person that we want to leave behind. And I've never met anyone who has done that the way you've done that.
Tearing apart the shit that's not working for you, your personality, and in your daily moods, the habits that you've created, and recognizing that those aren't working for you anymore and just working on removing them, that's shadow work. Mm-hmm. And I know, like, in the occult, we like to make it sound more magical than it is, but it is the ultimate therapy. And our listeners have heard me say this before. That, to me, is the ultimate witchcraft, is really digging deep into who you want to be and developing that person.
I've actually had a mentor of mine actually call it changing your magical DNA. Actually going and kind of stripping away the things that you don't want, that you don't need, that don't suit you anymore, and literally taking those pieces of the DNA, removing them, and then putting in things that you want and you need in your life.
Consciously building the person you are. Yeah, that's
neat, because I hadn't heard that term, and I certainly hadn't had it explained yet. Mm-hmm. But my second music festival ever, I did a ritual throughout the entire thing that was literally to let go of like fatalism and let go of anger and slowly put like hope and willpower, and then allow myself to be a sort of a tablet to write who I needed to be from that point on.
So shadow work right there.
I would actually say that's an initiation.
Yeah.
That's exactly an initiation experience. And having it be a strange world, like a music festival, or not purposely being in the place that you normally are and making those conscious efforts and sticking with them, that's an initiation.
Oh.
Go you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just stumbled ass backwards into all kinds of stuff.
Yay!
That's usually the best way to do it, right?
Yeah. As long as you stick with it, that's the important part.
Yeah.
So I have one question before we do take a short break. What are you wearing for your engagement ring right now?
Actually, I broke the hematite ring that I got right afterwards too. So right now, nothing. I am just holding a band of love around my heart for Rois.
Aww. That was sweet. I think I need to go take some take a type
insulin.
Yeah, some insulin.
Well, we're gonna take a short break. If you guys want to stay in the chat room and put like your phones down to get a drink or whatever you guys want to do, just cleanse your palate, whatever. I need to pee. Millennial Pagan Podcast is exclusively supported by Patreon. Listeners like you can gain great benefits from your favorite show, such as...
At $1 a month, you get a personalized shout-out at the end of the next full-length episode.
At $5 a month, you receive a thank you card in the mail with a Millennial Pagan Podcast button and sticker enclosed. Additionally, $5 a month supporters have access to our monthly 30-minute minisodes.
Patreon supporters are also the first to learn about new and exciting updates to Millennial Pagan Podcast.
More benefits and exclusive content to come.
All right, and we are back with Millennial Pagan Podcast, and we've got Rois and Phoenix over our Zoom meeting from the other side of the screen. Hello.
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 Now we should probably say that we are in the same state, but this actually kind of this whole venture kind of opens up talking to people outside of Arizona.
Yay!
So I mean, it definitely you guys listening and you guys watching after this comes out, let us know if you guys want to see some more of this, because I'm kind of really liking this.
Yeah, I definitely want a lot of comments about whether you guys thought the audio sounded just as amazing as normal, or whether you guys find it completely 100% acceptable, as long as we're getting more interesting people from outside just my friend circle. You guys are awesome. I'm not talking about you two. So, and this was a goal from the get-go, that we would have people from all over, all different walks of paganism or even occultism, communicating with us about their experiences and about different things. So this is like the start of something awesome right at our 2nd year anniversary.
Yes.
Woo!
Yay!
Yay! You're not
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, happy anniversary, you guys.
I'm
It's been a
excited.
great 2 years.
Oh, it's subdued because now I'm thinking, wow, 2 years, we've done so much already. What's next?
I don't know, but at least this year I don't have the noisemaker thing.
Yeah, it's
going.
true.
Yeah. I was thinking about pulling those out. I have a drawer of like all podcast stuff that I was like, I know exactly where those are. And when I brought it up during the planning of this episode, Sound Guy T and Jera both looked at me and went, no.
No.
Like, I thought that was awesome, but no.
Two's a great milestone. Let's get to 3.
Yes.
Let's get to 3 at
Let's
least.
get to 5.
I know we're gonna get to 5, but I want to get to 3 first, because 3 is a milestone for me.
Okay.
So
Okay. All right. So one thing people who are watching on YouTube might want to know is that obviously Jera and I are in the same room. We can't see Rois or Phoenix at the moment. We were trying to do a screen, but I felt it was more important that Sound Guy T could be able to maintain the visual than me and Jera being able to see the people we're communicating with, which is completely new for me. I'm used to being able to see the person in studio and like have weird chats during break and make faces at them with nobody seeing my face. So this is just new and exciting. Just be aware if I make weird faces when somebody's saying something, it's not because it's my face. It really is. And I can't see their face. So like if somebody's like almost about to cry and I'm just like, it's I'm listening to them.
You're very visually expressive. That's the thing.
am.
You need to be able to see what other people are saying. So we are gonna fix that eventually.
Yes.
But it's coming soon.
Sound Guy T.
It's kind of rude that you think you have to fix her face before you move on.
Yeah. G's talking tech stuff over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't hear you through my headphones, but that's okay because Phoenix was talking at the same time you were talking. So we're a work in progress, YouTube watchers and listeners of the podcast. This is a completely new thing for us. I'm gonna call this whole experience any failures. We're just gonna file it in the Terrible Twos file, and this is a consequence of the Terrible Twos. Is some of these things that might not be 100% amazing and ideal. I hope you guys, as our listeners, continue to hang in there. Give us comments about it. Give us suggestions if you know better stuff or better ways to do this, or like telling me that maybe I shouldn't wear that kind of makeup, but I'm not going to listen to you, so that's fine.
Don't tell me to wear makeup because you can't fix this. I'm sorry.
I keep telling you they have those now straighteners for your beard.
I have one. It's just I'm lazy.
Okay, I accept that.
He needs an official beard braider. That's all. That'll be set.
That's the thing with my beard here, because it's so coarse. It's very difficult to actually braid it and have it like stick in one direction. Because if I braid it, literally, it's going like like that. So yeah, I've tried, and this is how long my beard will grow. I don't even think it'll go any longer. So I've actually had the idea of actually taking my hair and kind of just braiding it into my beard. And,
oh my God, yes. That would be amazing.
But anyway.
I'm terrified. Anyway, so let's get back to the topic. I hope other people were as amused with that as we were.
And listeners, if you want to see that, go over to our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
YouTube channel people already got to see my terrified face. All right. We just talked about some your first ritual experience together. Since then, what have you guys changed or worked through, or what suggestions would you give people who are new in a relationship or in a family group for how to blend these traditions in for ritual?
Is there any way that we can pump the brakes on that for just a second?
Sure.
All right, because at the end of the ritual was really just the beginning of the story for that night.
Oh,
okay.
yes. More story time.
Yeah. I don't generally hold on to an altered state very long, but after the ritual was completed, I was very, for lack of a better term, tingly, like all over.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking and kind of processing it and whatnot. So obviously the conversation stuck with kind of more esoteric stuff. Like we talked about how it felt if we would have done anything differently. And then we got on the topic of tarot. And Royce showed me a very specific tarot deck that she was working with for a writing thing she was doing. I'll let her talk about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting because actually one of the people, the guests that you've had on, I think a couple times, Fred at this point,
Yes.
gave it to me. So yeah, it was the Starman Tarot, which is done by an artist who worked with David Bowie, and it's a gorgeous deck.
I've seen it,
and
I want to get it.
Oh my
It's
God,
amazing.
you should. It is really beautiful. So I have this thing where I'm trying to sort of have a more intimate connection with the tarot deck. And so what I've been doing is meditating on it, sort of writing a poem about each card. And so I might spend 3 or 4 days on one card. And since I have a bunch of tarot decks, I'm like, oh, well, I'll just look at a different tarot deck each time for that card. And so the Starman Tarot was one of the tarot decks I'm working with to do that. And the Priestess is really intense, and this is going to get a little nerdy for a minute, because a few days before we did this ritual, Phoenix had bought me a PS4, and it's like, oh, we should play DCU online. And I was like, okay, so I'll create this like comic book character. And I used all these things to create this like nature goddess type thing. So she has like vines all over her skin and purple hair, and she just looks very wild and beautiful. And this is before I'd looked at the Starman Tarot and the Priestess, but it basically looks like that card. I was like, oh, weird. I just like created this goddess a few days ago. I mean, not a goddess, but this priestess a few days ago, and it looks exactly the same. And I was showing it to Phoenix, and this was his first contact with the deck. So I don't know, Phoenix, if you want to talk about like what you felt when you were looking at it.
All right. There was a very intense difference. Like I said, I had the tarot that my grandma had given me from her grandma, and like I have a connection to that, but like I don't so much get an impression so much as I feel like very, very comfortable using it.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I laid my fingers on this priestess card from this deck. Now, if for those people who don't know, you can look it up, but it's very artistic, very abstract art. Like you can see the person, like the human form, but like there is a lot of just elements and colors and stuff added in, and each card is just a gorgeous work of art. And the second that I touched the priestess card, I felt almost like a vibration all the way down to my elbow, and there were elements that stuck out to me, and a story popped into my head, just a really short story that I had never considered before. and it was a different take on the Adam and Eve parable.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, it was impactful, and it was fresh, and it was very interesting. It sparked a longer conversation about the tarot and the priestess in particular, because I don't have a lot of the tarot, like what it means, memorized in my head. So like there was a lot of discussion about that. And then Royce left the room. I don't remember if it was to use the bathroom or go get a drink or something. And there's a symbol on top of the card, which has like two, I don't know if they're half moons or half circles. They're like wireframey, but there's a symbol on the top of the card, and the two moons are like back to back. And, I'm still looking at this card because I've never had an experience like this before. And I just got this moment of like intuition, I guess. And I went and I grabbed the broken pieces of my ring that we had brought upstairs, and I set it down, set the largest piece down on the left shape, the half moon, crescent, circle, whatever it was, and it completed the circle perfectly.
Oh, wow.
So the random break, and I have good spatial awareness, but I'm not the kind of guy who can like call out what fits where just by looking at things usually. So it was a jump for me. And I don't know, that really spoke to that I had made like the right choice with Royce, that this is like my priestess. But it was a lot coming from somewhere that I was not prepared to have it come from before. Like it was a very magically intense moment for me that I hadn't really experienced anything quite so heavy in any of my solo practice.
Nice.
So I've known Royce a little bit longer, and when she brought you to me at a group thing, was like, the boyfriend, and I'm like, and we got talking, and I was like, that fits. So when you guys announced that you were engaged, I was like, well, that's a little quick, but it wasn't like surprise. And I was like, whoa, guys. It was just like, oh, okay. That was sooner than expected, but okay. Like, to me, it wasn't a what you're saying about puzzle pieces fitting. I'm like, yeah, it was kind of the sense I got watching you guys interact. It was very much you're still your own two people, but it was very fitting. I can't find a better word.
That's really sweet of you to say. Yeah, we have all these things. We have all these compatibilities. Like we have similarities in some ways, but it's more like we match up. Like I have this strong affinity for dragons. Phoenix is obviously connected to the phoenix, and whether people are familiar with Eastern mythology or not, like the phoenix and the dragon represent the male and the feminine. So we both have that about each other, but they're switched. Like I like the masculine animal and he likes the feminine creature. And I really love blues, but I'm like a fire sign, and Phoenix is a Pisces, but he really likes red. So there's all these things about us where we just sort of interlock, and it feels really comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's definitely the yin yang dichotomy.
Yeah.
Love it.
No, then you just solidified everything I just thought to myself. So yes, exactly. So is that's the end of that story, right? I don't want to interrupt again because it keeps getting interesting.
Unless Royce has something to add, I think that's everything I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I would add is that Phoenix, I definitely felt like our first happened exactly when it should have, and even though it's been something we talked about for months and months, I waited because at that moment it was right for us to work together because we knew each other, well enough. Like our first few months together were really us learning how to be a healthy couple. And we've both been through some unhealthy relationships in the past and maybe had some personal stuff to work through, and realize that we did have the ability to trust each other. You know, like there's this saying in Wicca, perfect love and perfect trust. And I think that some people, it's lip service, right? Like that's what you say, or that's what you do. And to truly have perfect love and perfect trust, I think it's difficult to have that with a huge group of people, like to be that really intimate with them. But with Phoenix and I, it's absolutely true. I love him perfectly. I trust him perfectly. I know, you know, like I feel comfortable and I can be intimate with him. So when you have that level of intimacy with another person, it opens up possibilities. And that first ritual together was in some ways similar to my first ritual with my first coven, in that we were just really buzzed and sensitive and excited and peaceful all at the same time. That first coming together of something really special. But then there was also just the level of that it was our first ritual together as a couple, and it was, you know, this brand new kind of intimacy that I hadn't experienced before.
So, taking my foot off the brake, go gas room all the way to what would you tell people in a relationship or in a group that they would need to be prepared to do when blending two different traditions or multiple different traditions, starting their first ritual out in a very intimate space?
Well, mine would be the same thing that you say about every relationship and everything you do in relationships. Communication is key.
Yes.
We had, go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
All right. We did have, like, we had a little hiccup just discussing certain beliefs and stuff kind of early on, but it was because, like, as a chaos mage, like, sometimes I have to visualize half steps to get somewhere, and some things are just way more natural, especially if somebody has more experience. So we had a little bit of an issue talking about, like, elements. Like, I've always felt calm and more connected to things in a city, and Royce is very comfortable in nature. So I had half steps, like city elements, that could get me to feeling comfortable with natural elements when working with them and whatnot. And that was totally natural for Royce. And we had a little bit of an abrasive situation when we were talking about that. But the fact that we can communicate, and the fact that we listen and think about it when something like that goes wrong, like, we don't hold it against each other and we just try to do better, really, like, the fact that 2 weeks later we had a conversation about that abrasiveness, and Royce said she came to a different understanding, and I won't tell that part of it, but it was that helped build that perfect trust we were talking about, because I can trust her with, like, my spirit, and I can trust her with my thoughts, even though there are these, like, obstacles. Sometimes we don't close ourselves off to it, and that communication and that being willing to understand and view things from a different way was incredibly important, at least on my half, to us finding that level of intimacy that allowed us to work together as well as we did.
Yeah, Phoenix is being really kind because that's who he is. My version of that story is that I was a brat. We were relaxed and talking about the elements, and I just have, you know, I don't really think about what my biases are. I just have this idea of, like, oh, well, these are the nature elements, and they're very easy, or at least some of them are very easy for me to connect with. Like, I get fire, I get air, I understand water. Earth, I'm probably the least comfortable with, but I've done meditations on Earth. So I understand what the elements are and what they represent, and it feels very easy for me to connect to them. And I think maybe because I have so much respect for these awesome things that Phoenix can do that I can't, it's like, oh, well, you're a stronger empath than I am, and you're an aesthetic empath, and like you just have all these cool abilities and strengths. It was just so I just like, oh, well, if you can do all this cool stuff that I can't do, then obviously you understand how the elements work, and why wouldn't you just it was a really ignorant, I was coming from a very ignorant place where I just didn't realize what I assumed was true. And it's like, okay, that's not true for everyone. That's just my personal experience and how I see things and how I experience them. But I was just like, oh, well, that's just how they are. Like, that's what everyone experiences. And that's completely untrue. And I was so unkind. And I felt really terrible that I was so sort of ignorant in the way I thought about things and the way I experienced them. But it gave me an opportunity to reflect and realize, like, okay, just because you've been doing this a long time and it's very natural for you, that doesn't mean that everyone experiences the elements that way. That's your experience, and other people have different paths to get where they want to go. And those paths are 100% valid. They're just not familiar to you. And that was a stretch because my best friend experiences things very similar to the way I do. So when I talked to her about this, conversation that Phoenix and I had, I'm like, so how do you feel about the elements? And she's like, oh, well, this, and that. And I'm like, I know, right? So like, because my best friend is my, oldest magical partner, we're living in a magical echo chamber. We're like, oh no, this is just reality. And like, it's not reality. It's our reality. It's not the same reality that as other people experience. So.
And I think that's kind of apropos, especially with everything that's going on right now in the world, where people are spending a lot more time with, with their partners, with people that they're living with. That kind of just brings out, hey, communication is key, especially when, you're in a confined space together right now. Being able to bring that up and to communicate every aspect of what you're doing, why you're doing it. It definitely brings out the best in both sides of the relationship.
Like those memes of, I didn't know I lived with a, can we table this subject for now person in meetings. It's like not knowing like that's how you are at work. Like you're that, I would hate to work with you, and that's why you don't.
Yeah.
But I loved that you said that you were living in a magical echo chamber, because I think that happens a lot more than we want to admit. In our specific traditions, and some traditions more than others, where they don't go out to maybe open groups and they don't see that what they're experiencing is not necessarily the norm, or that there are others. But I like that you did overcome that and are able to admit it. And I don't think you're as terrible of a person as you're making yourself feel.
I mean, for me,
She's
it's like
not.
we're
You
both,
might be biased.
we're both I think we're both vulnerable people. Like, we're the kind of people who just open ourselves to others, and we definitely open ourselves to each other. So it was humbling for me to realize that, it was easy for me to hurt somebody's feelings when that wasn't my intention. Like, I was literally confused. I was like, but no, this is how it is. And it was a humbling experience of my own ignorance and how easy it was for me to just like hurt someone's feelings when I didn't mean to. And I really reflected on that, and I took a lot of time to think about why it happened and think about where that bias was coming from. And it was an opportunity to grow and just see things in a new way and just realize, like, oh, well, I look at this, I mean, honestly, the Iron Druid, like, this is where this was coming from. And I've never read the Dresden Files, but Phoenix is talking to me about it and like how he connected to those ideas. And I would, like I said, my ignorant response was like, well, why would you just put these, these city ideas, like there's earth in a city, there's fire in a city, there's, like you can see these things in a city, and I do frequently. So why would you add this extra step? And I just didn't realize that those steps are a pathway for people who don't see things the way I do. That makes it make way more sense. Like, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay. It's not people putting themselves further away from this source. It's just a different pathway to the same place.
You just made this whole thing like round out and make sense to me 100%. Having that extra like explanation really made me go, oh, okay, I see what happened. So I'm amused that every time we talk to a group or a couple that I say, what is your number one piece of advice? And it is always communication. 100%. So thank you guys. You've been super amazing, super awesome. We need to hang out more.
Yes.
As people outside of podcast land. But with that said, I'm going to thank.
I will say really quick, as soon as this whole thing's done, definitely we need to hang out.
I'm so excited. Awesome. I love you guys. I've been listening to your podcast. There's very few that I've missed. I have maybe I'm behind 2 or 3, but like I came back from living abroad about 2 years ago. And there's just been so much time where your podcast was my favorite thing. I was like, oh, I have another one and I get to listen to it. So you've just given me so much. So I want to thank you for everything you guys have done because you've been a really important part of my life.
I'm just so glad you're back.
Yeah, me too.
You told me you're leaving, and I was like, I went up to Fred, and I was like, so I need her on my podcast. And she's like, that's great. She's in Japan. What? What?
I had itchy feet, but I have like really wonderful people like you guys who calm me down, so I can like be here and enjoy.
You can have itchy feet. You just have to tell me next time.
I'm sorry.
I got butt hurt.
I love you. I love you.
But with that, we need to thank some Patreon supporters.
Yes.
Yay!
Let me see.
That one.
Melania.
Okay.
Melania, that's kind of how I see it.
I'm seeing it as Melonia, so
Melonia.
I'm gonna go with yours because that might be right.
Melonia or Melania.
So Melonia, thank you. Nikki, thank you. Elizabeth, thank you.
That is 3?
That is 3.
Wow.
Dude, look at this list of people I need to send like thank you notes
I know,
to.
right?
Like, yes. So thank all of you, all Patreon supporters. If you're not a Patreon supporter, then I think there's an ad either in this episode or a previous episode that explains all this great stuff about why you should be a Patreon supporter, or hop on over to our Patreon and see all about that. And otherwise, where can they find you on the interwebs, Jera?
Of course, you can find me on my Instagram page, Haggard_cosplay. A lot of underscores there. And of course, at Twitter, at Jera Stone. And if you're looking at our YouTube page, hey,
you're here. So I didn't give you guys any prep, but do you have anything that you want to push or support? Rois, where can they find you if they want to get a tarot reading?
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's a great question. You can reach me by email, I guess. It's Rois is not in the title. It's a.m.allston@gmail.com. And yeah, I love reading tarot for people, so hit me up.
Yay! And Phoenix, if they want to get to know you more, obviously you don't have to.
I have an email address, which is Nero, Nero 0226 @yahoo.com. And if you search David Heinspeeder on Facebook, I'm always up to talk. I will literally talk about anything, write a story about anything, and generally just try to make everyone a little bit more positive before they stop talking to me.
Nice.
Awesome. We might have to kidnap you once again, Phoenix, for some talk about chaos magic, but you can find me, Autumn Wolf, on Facebook and on Twitter as Autumn Wolf. You can find me on WordPress as the Iron Wolf Circle. And then you can find the podcast on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram and Patreon. Yay!
So
yay!
And again, just like we've been saying, for the past couple of weeks, to everybody that's out there that is listening, for all you frontline supporters, for everybody that's out there that's braving everything that's happening right now, thank you again from the bottom of our hearts, and we wish you guys well.
Yes. So merry meet
and merry part
and merry meet again.